Romans 13, verses 1 to 4. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Is this a commandment only for those who are under laws, or is it also for lawmakers? In the case of immigration law, immigrants are those under it, and citizens, through their votes, are the lawmakers. When we find 49% of immigrants unwilling or unable to obey our laws, shall we assume everyone else in the world is incredibly lawless by nature compared with us? Or shall we become curious whether there might be something about our laws that make them inhumanly burdensome or impossible to obey? Let's look at that 49% figure. Why do I say that 49% of applications are rejected? Well, about 175,900 are allowed to legally from Mexico every year, which is less than 2 out of 100 of the roughly 10 million from Mexico already here trying to crowd in that same short line. I get that from a Wikipedia article, Immigration to the United States in 2011. We know illegals try to legalize because the approximately 1 million immigrants allowed to come legally each year from all over the world includes about 600,000 already living here who finally received their adjustment of status papers from the DHS. The disparity is not that extreme for other nations, because between those admitted and those here illegally. But it is greater if we would count those from other nations who are in line outside our U.S. embassies in other lands, who would come if we would allow them. Now, does this passage command Christians to obey laws which do the opposite of what this passage promises? That is, laws which reward the wicked and punish the righteous? Who are the criminals when laws are violated which are impossible to obey and which violate the Constitution and the laws of God? Who are the criminals? Those who violate the laws, or the lawmakers and voters who authorized them? Now, of course, the unconstitutionality or wickedness of a law doesn't change the fact that, as Romans says, he beareth not the sword in vain. In other words, just because a law is unjust doesn't mean it's not going to be enforced. For this practical reason, if not for any biblical imperative, we aren't encouraging anyone to violate our immigration laws if they can possibly avoid it without loss of life. Is there significance in the fact that higher powers is plural? Does this presume the higher powers are in agreement, since it is impossible to obey all of them when they contradict one another? This raises the question, which power should we obey if a higher power contradicts the highest power? Is this question answered by Acts 5:29? We ought to obey God rather than man. Where this passage is a commandment for lawmakers and for voters, America's ultimate lawmaking authorities, is it a command to support laws which honor God's definitions of who ought to be rewarded and who punished? God says it is righteous to provide for your own family, 1 Timothy 5:8. But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith, and is worse than an infidel. Are immigrants who come here to provide for those of their own homes, who otherwise would surely die of hunger or exposure, are they obeying God? Are they obeying God rather than our immigration laws? Are our laws, which force them to choose between the lives of their families or obedience to our immigration laws, are our laws fulfilling God's purpose for laws given in Romans 13? According to this passage in Romans, if we do good, we should have no fear of government. But when millions of Hispanics do good, in obedience to God, caring for their families as God commands, they have much to fear from our government. Why? What went wrong? Just as it is a choice of our heart whether to love or hate, is it an arbitrary choice of our heart whether to classify an immigrant as legal or as illegal? Do American hearts soften for about 1 million immigrants from all over the world and after that harden? Our line is open the first day of each year. After that, should we characterize them, our quotas, as the quotas in our love that kick in? When we tire of loving immigrants, does Romans 13 authorize us to simply classify the next batch as illegal? Our numerical limitations on how many immigrants we allow to come legally each year may not be set by any committee or bureaucracy of economists objectively measuring how many jobs we need filled and making adjustments every month as the job market changes. But our quotas are a precise measure of how many immigrants our hearts are willing to love. Do our laws provide spiritual cover for our hate?